McDonald's owes $54 billion, more than the GDP of Bulgaria, more than the annual budget of the entire US Navy. And yet, it pays its shareholders every single year, raises the dividend every year without fail. It paid out $7.17 per share last year. This year, it will pay more. It has done this for decades. It will never stop. Here is the question nobody asks. Where does the money come from? Not from burgers, not even close. McDonald's earns a 15% margin selling food. It earns a 46% margin on something else. Franchise revenue, 46.1%. Operating margin, company-owned restaurants, 15 to 18%. And here is the fact that will stop you scrolling. By Q1 2026, McDonald's carries $54.89 billion in total debt against negative $1.28 billion in shareholder equity. Debt to equity ratio, negative 4,268%. On paper, McDonald's is technically insolvent. And they did that on purpose. Because McDonald's doesn't sell hamburgers. It never did. It sells a system. It sells debt. It sells the illusion of a restaurant company to cover the reality of something far more powerful. 3 questions are going to change how you see this company forever. First, if McDonald's is technically insolvent, who is protecting that secret and why? Second, how did a 15-cent burger stand in California become the world's most aggressive commercial landlord? And third, McDonald's is spending $3.9 billion every year just to stand still. So what happens when they can't? The answers are not what you expect. None of them. Strategy Lens exposes how the world's most powerful corporations actually operate. Not the press releases, not the earnings calls. The architecture they don't want audited. If you want to understand the financial world the way a forensic analyst does, not the way a shareholder relations team wants you to, subscribe, because we're just getting started. The first decision. Act 1. In 1948, 2 brothers shut down a profitable restaurant for 3 months. Not because it was failing, because it was succeeding the wrong way. Morris and Richard McDonald had built a thriving drive-in on the corner of 14th and East Street in San Bernardino, California. Car hops serving 125 cars at a time. A 25-item barbecue menu. Slow cooked and expensive. A loyal following and annual sales topping 200,000. Good money by any metric of the era. Everything a local restaurateur could want. They threw all of it away. The brothers had been watching their own sales data with the obsessive precision of engineers, because that is what they were temperamentally. Not chefs, not restaurateurs, but architects of efficiency, engineers of process, timing every single movement. And the data told them something uncomfortable. Hamburgers, accounting for 80% of revenue. Fries, crisp, fast, and high margin. Soft drinks, the third pillar of the system. Those 3 items were driving the overwhelming majority of their revenue. Everything else was overhead, complexity, and friction. So they closed, defying every industry norm. Retooled for a production line that would change the world. Reopened with 9 items, no car hops, no silverware, and a kitchen modeled on something that had never been applied to food service before. The Ford assembly line applied to the kitchen floor. Each station had one task only. The person making fries did not flip burgers. The person wrapping sandwiches did not pour drinks. Specialization drove the wait time from 20 minutes to 60 seconds. Prices were cut almost in half. 15-cent hamburgers. They called it the Speedy Service System, and it made them famous. By 1954, word had spread far enough that a 52-year-old multi-mixer salesman from Illinois decided to drive across the country to see what was happening in San Bernardino. His name was Ray Kroc. He was not looking for a business opportunity yet. He was trying to understand why a single restaurant in the California desert had ordered 8 industrial multi-mixers at once for a single stand. 8 from one location, 40 spindles whirring. That was insane for a post-war economy. What Kroc saw when he arrived was not a restaurant. It was a system, and systems can be duplicated in ways that restaurants cannot. A great chef cannot clone himself, but a manual can. But a process? A process can be installed anywhere. Kroc persuaded the brothers to let him become their national franchise agent. He spent the next 7 years methodically building a franchise network, while also watching the brothers refuse to let him change anything that might disrupt their original San Bernardino location. That fiction would become a war. 1961, Kroc buys out the McDonald brothers. Purchase price $2.7 million cash. 1 million net per brother after taxes. Kroc's bank account at the time of the deal near zero. Kroc financed the buyout by borrowing against the future, personally unable to cover the cost. He went deep into debt to own something that, at that moment, had no guaranteed future. The irony is not subtle. The founder of McDonald's built his empire on borrowed money, and every CEO since has done exactly the same thing, just at a scale that would have been unimaginable in 1961. But the buyout had a footnote that revealed something dark about what Kroc was becoming. The brothers had a handshake agreement to keep their original San Bernardino restaurant. Kroc had verbally agreed to the handshake deal. When the deal closed, the brothers discovered that the written contract contained no such protection. Kroc had let it stand. The brothers renamed their restaurant the Big M, and Kroc, without hesitation, opened a McDonald's directly across the street from them. He drove them out of business within years. The men who created the system were destroyed by it. Kroc gets the mythology in the history books, but the person who built the actual machine was a man most people have never heard of. Harry Sonneborn, the man behind the machine. Sonneborn joined McDonald's as vice president of finance in the mid-50s, and he looked at the business with a question that nobody else was asking. What is this company actually selling? Not hamburgers, Sonneborn decided, and not even franchises were the primary product. McDonald's was selling something far more durable. Location, the true cornerstone of the empire. Sonneborn's insight was architecturally simple and financially devastating to everyone who came after. McDonald's, he argued, should not be in the business of giving franchisees land to operate on. McDonald's should own the land, sign the long-term leases directly, then sublease to franchisees at a markup of 20 to 40% above what McDonald's itself was paying. The restaurant could have a bad month. The rent was still due. Franchise realty started with $1,000, and Harry turned it into 170 million internal McDonald's documents. This single decision is why McDonald's exists at the scale it does today. Not the Big Mac, not the Happy Meal, not the drive-thru. Sonneborn's real estate model turned a restaurant company into something that could not fail, as long as commerce continued to happen near its buildings. And it planted a seed that would grow into something none of them fully anticipated. Because when you build your empire on land, the question of who really controls the business gets complicated. The franchisee thinks they're running a restaurant. McDonald's knows they're a rent-paying tenant. That distinction, tenant versus operator, franchisee versus landlord, is the tension at the heart of every crisis McDonald's has ever faced. By the time McDonald's went public in 1965, the model was already fully formed. A man named Fred Turner, who would eventually succeed Kroc as CEO, had developed the quality, service, cleanliness, and value framework that would govern every restaurant on earth. 1/10 of a pound of beef, 19% fat content, 0 fillers. The specifications were written down, enforced, and non-negotiable. Because the product was never the burger. The product was the system. And the system only has value if it is perfectly replicable. The Filet-O-Fish in 1962. The Big Mac in 1968. The Egg McMuffin in 1972. The Happy Meal in 1979. These were not accidents. They were engineering decisions dressed as culinary innovation. McDonald's had learned to grow not by accumulating value, but by leveraging debt against the certainty of future rent. But that comes later. First, the rise. The 4 levers nobody talks about. Everyone knows McDonald's is big. 45,000 restaurants, 100 countries, a global footprint, 69 million customers every day. These numbers are published. They are not the interesting part. The interesting part is how the bigness compounds. First lever, the real estate arbitrage. McDonald's does not just own buildings. It owns the specific intersections, highway interchanges, and suburban corridors where commercial traffic is highest. A new McDonald's is not placed randomly. It is placed where satellite data, traffic flow modeling, and decade-long demographic studies say a restaurant will capture more customers per square foot than almost any other use of that land. The company then charges its franchisees rent tied to a percentage of sales, not just a flat rate. So when the restaurant thrives because McDonald's selected a great location, McDonald's captures a percentage of that upside. The franchisee did the work, managing staff in a high pressure machine. McDonald's owns the outcome and the land beneath it. McDonald's owns the land under 55% of franchised restaurants. McDonald's owns the buildings for 80% of franchised restaurants. Rental income alone, nearly $10 billion annually. Yum Brands, KFC, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, property revenue $115 million. Think about what that comparison means. McDonald's generates nearly 87 times more property income than its closest comparable franchise peer. Not because McDonald's is better at selling food, because McDonald's is better at owning land. Second lever, the supply chain monopsony. McDonald's purchases so much beef, so many potatoes, so much poultry that it does not buy ingredients at market prices. It effectively sets market prices. In the United States alone, McDonald's bought 714 million pounds of beef in 2023. No individual farmer, no regional processor, no competing chain can access raw materials at the cost McDonald's secures. When commodity costs spike, as they did ferociously between 2022 and 2024, McDonald's can absorb the shock better than any competitor. Its franchisees cannot absorb it at all. But the corporate entity, which owns the real estate and collects the rent regardless, rides the inflation out. Third lever, the loyalty data machine. In 2025, McDonald's generated $37 billion in system-wide sales through its loyalty app, 210 million active users globally. This is not a rewards program. This is a surveillance and pricing engine. The app knows when you buy, it knows what you buy, it knows whether you responded to the last promotional offer or ignored it. Based on that data, McDonald's can offer you a $4 burger while the person behind you in line pays $6, and both of you think you're getting a deal. This is not speculation. This is documented in their strategic materials. They are buying your behavioral data every time you use that app. The loyalty points are payment. Fourth lever, the franchise structure as a legal shield. McDonald's corporate employs roughly 150,000 people directly. The franchise system employs approximately 2 million more, none of whom are McDonald's employees in the legal sense. When a franchisee pays workers below living wage, violates child labor laws, or runs a restaurant with unsanitary conditions, McDonald's corporate says, "That is not us. That is an independent business owner." This legal fiction is so valuable that McDonald's spent decades and millions defending it in court. It is, effectively, an outsourcing arrangement for all liability. Here is the thing about McDonald's extraordinary growth from 1961 to the present. Almost none of it required McDonald's to be good at food. When the Big Mac was introduced in 1968, it was not introduced because McDonald's R&D team developed a superior sandwich. It was introduced because a Pittsburgh franchisee named Jim Deligati invented it on his own and sold it locally. McDonald's adopted it nationally after the fact. The Filet-O-Fish, a Cincinnati franchisee, defeated Ray Kroc's own invention, the Hula Burger, a grilled pineapple with cheese, in a head-to-head test on a single Friday. The score? Filet-O-Fish 350 units, Hula Burger 6. Kroc adopted the franchisee's idea. The Egg McMuffin? A Santa Barbara franchisee, Herb Peterson, developed it in secret and presented it to Kroc as a finished product. Kroc put it on the national menu. McDonald's did not invent the products that made it famous. Its franchisees did. McDonald's captured the intellectual property. This model generates zero R&D cost for the products that define the brand. McDonald's built an empire by extracting value from land, from suppliers, from franchisees, from the behavioral data of its customers. The system is extraordinary, and the system is also the problem, because extraction has a ceiling. And by the late 2010s, McDonald's began to hit it the sterile, modern dining room, becoming a tomb for volume. Everything is about to change. The balance sheet nobody reads. Let's go back to that number. Debt to equity, negative 4,268%. In standard financial analysis, a company with negative shareholder equity is a company in distress. Creditors will start circling, ratings agencies will downgrade, borrowing costs will spike. In most industries, this is a death sentence. McDonald's is not most companies. Here is how the engineering works. McDonald's has repurchased so much of its own stock over so many decades that its treasury stock, the shares it has bought back from the market, has completely consumed and inverted its book equity. The company owns more of itself than it is theoretically worth on paper. 2021 negative 1072%, 2025 negative 3061, Q1 2026 negative 4268%. That trajectory is not random, it is a choice. Each year, McDonald's makes the deliberate decision to borrow more, buy back more stock, and push the equity further negative. Because every dollar of equity removed from the balance sheet makes the remaining equity look more valuable, which drives the stock price up, which allows management to justify larger bonuses tied to stock performance. The shareholders win, the executives win. The rating agencies, aware that McDonald's franchised cash flows are extraordinarily stable, hold the line on credit ratings, and the debt just grows silently, year after year. By the end of Q1 2026, McDonald's carried $54.89 billion in total debt. Its interest expense in 2025 alone was $1.58 billion. That is $1.58 billion in a single year, just servicing the loans. And to pay for it, McDonald's had to borrow more. The interest coverage ratio is the metric that tells you how much buffer a company has between its operating income and its debt service. Until you notice the direction of travel. It was 8.3 on average. Now it is 7.2 and it is still going down. If franchise revenues were to drop by even 10%, the $1.58 billion interest bill would consume net income almost entirely. The financial media does not cover this. They cover same-store sales, they cover EPS, they do not cover the debt-to-capital ratio, which hit 1.03 in 2025, meaning debt now exceeds total capital. They do not cover the fact that McDonald's is right now borrowing money to pay its dividend. The Luxembourg syndicate. The debt is the open secret. The tax architecture is the secret that was almost buried. Before 2009, McDonald's European royalty revenues flowed to Delaware. In 2009, McDonald's restructured. A Luxembourg-based subsidiary, McD Europe Franchising SARL, was created. Luxembourg's corporate tax code permitted up to 80% tax exemptions on royalties. The money moved. The tax burden did not. McDonald's France began doubling its royalty payments to the Luxembourg entity from the standard 5% to 10%. French tax investigators spent years piecing together the mechanism. McDonald's was systematically stripping profits out of France. June 16, 2022, McDonald's enters CJIP settlement with French authorities. Amount paid 1.245 billion euros in back taxes and fines. Alternative to settlement. Criminal prosecution for tax fraud 1.245 billion to avoid a criminal trial. There was also a parallel investigation at the European Commission level. Commissioner Margrethe Vestager ultimately concluded that the arrangement did not technically violate EU state aid rules. McDonald's had found a gap in the regulatory architecture and parked hundreds of millions of euros in it. McDonald's effective tax rate 20 to 22% despite complex multi-jurisdictional operations. The restructuring initiative accelerating the organization, pre-tax charges of $450 million in strategic losses that suppressed taxable income. The Easterbrook cover-up, investigation, Act 3. Now we close the first open loop. Who is protecting the secret of McDonald's financial architecture and why? In November 2019, McDonald's announced that CEO Stephen Easterbrook had been terminated for a consensual, non-physical relationship with an employee. The phrasing was deliberate, consensual, non-physical. poor judgment. The board framed it as a matter of company policy, a man of poor judgment who had broken the rules, but not a predator. The stock barely moved. That was the entire point. In July 2020, an anonymous whistleblower told the board something different. Easterbrook had engaged in multiple physical sexual relationships with subordinates. He had awarded those subordinates company equity on behalf of the shareholders. He had deleted the evidence, scrubbed from the system. The board had a choice: disclose everything to the SEC as required or manage the information. They managed the information, keeping the secret hidden. The board had deliberately classified Easterbrook's termination as without cause. That legal categorization allowed Easterbrook to walk out with approximately $44 million in unvested equity. The board knew, based on their own investigation, that a for-cause termination was warranted. They chose the other option: protecting the board. Why? Because for-cause meant a public legal battle. A public legal battle meant discovery. Discovery meant journalists, analysts, and regulators asking questions that went well beyond the relationship into the financial core. November 2019, Easterbrook fired. Board categorizes without cause. Equity package $44 million. July 2020. Whistleblower reveals multiple physical relationships, equity awards, deleted evidence. December 2021, Easterbrook returns $105 million in cash and equity. January 2023, SEC charges Easterbrook. Fine $400,000. Banned from officer roles for 5 years. McDonald's, charged with violating Securities Act for disclosure failures. Fine $0. McDonald's paid 0 fines to the SEC. The company received a waiver for substantial cooperation. The man who misled investors was fined $400,000 out of the $105 million he was forced to return. The board members who orchestrated the cover-up faced no legal consequences whatsoever. What changed because of this? The SEC adopted new mandatory clawback rules in 2022. The McDonald's board governance failure became federal securities law. There is a pattern here that connects the Luxembourg tax structure, the debt engineering, and the Easterbrook cover-up. McDonald's corporate entity in Chicago operates as a machine for protecting a specific financial architecture. When that architecture is threatened by investigators, by journalists, by the SEC, the response is management and containment, not disclosure. The facts, when presented in isolation, look like separate crises. Connected, they look like a philosophy. The rigged lottery, a decade of deceit. From 1989 to 2001, 12 years, almost every high-value prize in the McDonald's Monopoly game was stolen. Not occasionally, systematically. 12 years of organized theft. The game generated hundreds of millions of dollars in incremental sales for McDonald's every year it ran. Customers genuinely believed the game was real. They bought extra meals chasing the $1 million prize. The winning pieces never reached them, simply discarded as waste in a rigged system. Operation Final Answer. The FBI takes down Jerome Jacobson, the director of security who compromised the game. Jerome Jacobson, the director of security, stole virtually all high-value winning pieces. Distribution network. Colombo crime family members, psychics, strip club owners, drug traffickers. Method: kickbacks in exchange for pieces. Winners submitted claims through unwitting intermediaries. Amount stolen: $24 million. McDonald's response: claimed complete ignorance. Paid $25 million in consolation sweepstakes plus $15 million settlement. McDonald's claimed it was the victim. And in the narrowest legal sense, that is true. What is also true is that McDonald's ran the world's most successful marketing promotion for 12 years, generated hundreds of millions in revenue from it, and conducted audits so superficial that they failed to notice that virtually every winning prize was being delivered to a network of organized criminals. Basic analytical flags were visible. Multiple million-dollar winners from identical geographic clusters. Familial connections between winners. Whether that was negligence or something else, that question was never definitively answered in court. The structural discrimination, the flaw in the model. A landlord with site selection authority is a landlord with enormous power over who succeeds and who fails. In August 2020, 52 black former franchise owners filed a federal civil rights lawsuit. The core allegation: McDonald's had systematically steered black entrepreneurs into economically depressed, high crime inner city neighborhoods while offering white franchisees prime suburban locations. The profitable promised land of the Golden Arches. In 1998, there were 377 black McDonald's franchisees. By 2020, that number had fallen to 186, while the total number of restaurants grew substantially. December 2021, McDonald's settles Herb Washington's individual suit, buys out his 13 restaurants for $33.5 million. The settlements were not admissions of liability, but the dollars were real, and the structural mechanism behind the claim is not disputed. It is, in fact, how the business was designed. The question of whether that design was used deliberately to disadvantage specific communities was never resolved in court. McDonald's paid, the system continued. The CapEx Treadmill Investigation Act 4. This is the second open loop closing. McDonald's is spending $3.9 billion a year just to stand still. Here is what that actually means, physically and financially. Between 2021 and 2025, McDonald's capital expenditure grew from $2 billion to $3.36 billion. In 2026, the projected spend is $3.7 to $3.9 billion, roughly 14% of total revenue. Management is opening approximately 2,600 restaurants globally in 2026 alone, targeting 50,000 total units by 2027. The official framing: aggressive growth strategy, expansion, confidence. The forensic framing: desperation arithmetic. Here is the desperation arithmetic. In 2025, McDonald's US comparable store sales, same restaurants, year over year, grew just 2.1%. That is barely above inflation. When your same store sales are flat in real terms, the only way to grow total revenue is to open more doors. But every new door requires capital. Capital requires debt. Debt requires interest payments. Interest payments require cash flow. Cash flow requires same-store sales growth that is not materializing. And as it runs faster, the debt load grows. As the debt load grows, the interest coverage ratio falls. This is a company running faster to stay in the same place. As the interest coverage ratio falls, the margin for error shrinks. The price that broke the promise. McDonald's has one foundational promise to its customer: value. Between 2019 and 2024, McDonald's menu prices rose approximately 40%. This was not entirely McDonald's choice. Inflation was real. Labor costs were rising. Commodity prices were spiking. Prices that made McDonald's contextually more expensive than sit-down alternatives. 2023 to 2024. Viral social media posts, $18 Big Mac meals photographed across multiple US markets. But McDonald's passed those costs onto consumers with particular aggression. Through the drive-thru window. Consumer survey finding: 1 in 3 Americans visiting McDonald's less often. Single most common complaint: too expensive. Traffic loss: lower income households under $50,000 a year show largest visit declines. The working class family, the low income consumer, the people who treated McDonald's as an affordable treat, not a luxury. When the treat became expensive, they left. McDonald's response: a $5 meal deal introduced in 2024 and sustained through 2025 acknowledged the damage. But to offer a $5 meal profitably, McDonald's had to absorb a margin hit. The franchisees absorbed most of the hit. The mathematical problem this created: McDonald's most loyal demographic is also its most price-sensitive demographic. Corporate collected its rent regardless. It is also exactly the thing that is straining the relationship between McDonald's and its franchise network to a degree not seen in decades. Not to Burger King, not to Wendy's. They left to their own kitchens and to grocery stores. 2023 to 2024. Viral social media posts, $18 Big Mac meals photographed across multiple US markets. Consumer survey finding: 1 in 3 Americans visiting McDonald's less often. Single most common complaint: too expensive. Traffic loss: Lower income households under $50,000 a year show largest visit declines. That asymmetry, value erosion borne by franchisees, real estate income stable at corporate, is exactly how the Sonneborn model was designed. When the trade became expensive, they left. In October 2023, the Israeli McDonald's franchisee, a company called Aloniel, made a unilateral decision. It announced free meals for Israeli military personnel following the outbreak of conflict in the Middle East. McDonald's corporate did not make that decision, but McDonald's corporate bore the consequences. Consumer boycotts swept across the Arab and Muslim world. In some markets, comparable sales dropped by 70%. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Pakistan, Malaysia, markets that represented years of accumulated brand equity wiped out by a decision made in a single afternoon. Financial impact March 2024. McDonald's CFO warns of consecutive quarter drops. Single day stock decline, negative 3.37%. Market capitalization destroyed in that single trading session. $6.87 billion. McDonald's response. Purchased all 228 Israeli restaurants from Alonial in 2024. Corporate acknowledgement in 2025 SEC filings. Rising anti-American sentiment will suppress regional revenues until conflict resolves. The decentralized franchise model, McDonald's greatest structural advantage, became its greatest liability. Because you cannot control what 45,000 independent operators do. And in a world of viral social media, one franchise decision anywhere can ignite a brand crisis everywhere. The E. coli quarter. On September 12, 2024, people began getting sick. The illness was E. coli 0157:H7, one of the most dangerous strains of foodborne pathogen. By October, the CDC and FDA had traced the source. Slivered onions from a Taylor Farms facility in Colorado. Those onions had been distributed to approximately 900 McDonald's restaurants across 14 states. 2024 E. coli outbreak. Final figures: 104 confirmed infections, 34 hospitalizations, 1 death. US comparable sales fell 1.4% in Q4. Emergency Recovery Fund deployed by McDonald's, $100 million. 65 million direct to impacted franchisees. 35 million emergency marketing spend in 14 affected states. $100 million to contain a supply chain failure that quality assurance systems did not detect. The $35 million marketing spend in the 14 affected states deserves particular scrutiny. McDonald's effectively purchased enough advertising inventory to drown out the investigative journalism trying to follow the story. Local journalists found themselves operating against a wall of McDonald's advertising saturating their stations. The outbreak was contained. The story was managed. The marketing spend was an investment in narrative control, not consumer safety. The labor architecture. In 2023, the US Department of Labor launched sweeping investigations. What they found: over 300 minors working illegally long hours across 62 locations in 4 states. At a franchisee operating in Louisville, Kentucky, federal investigators found 2 10-year-old children working unpaid, operating deep fryers, cleaning the restaurant as late as 2 o'clock in the morning. $212,000 in fines for child labor across 62 locations. McDonald's response: corporate headquarters does not dictate local hiring. $212,000 in fines for child labor. The franchise structure absorbs that liability at the franchisee level. Corporate headquarters notes the legal barrier and moves on. Labor economists will tell you that the relentless extraction of rent and royalties creates a mathematical pressure on franchisees to find cheap labor. Children fit all 3 criteria: cheap, compliant, or afraid to complain. Corporate creates the pressure. Franchisees find the release. That is the structure. It is not a bug, it is a feature. 3 things McDonald's does brilliantly. First, it built a financial moat that is genuinely almost impossible to replicate. The combination of owned real estate, franchise royalties, and supply chain scale produces a 46.1% operating margin. Yum Brands, which operates KFC, Taco Bell, and Pizza Hut globally, manages 32 to 34%. Restaurant Brands International runs 33 to 35. McDonald's generates a free cash flow margin of 26.7%. nearly double the industry average of 15%. During the inflation cycle of 2022 to 2024, when independent restaurants and asset-light competitors were being crushed by rent inflation, McDonald's was immune. They own the land, they are the landlord. Inflation in commercial real estate values is not a cost to McDonald's, it is a balance sheet gain. Second, the resilience engineering is exceptional. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, McDonald's maintained 62,000 Russian employees on payroll during the suspension period at a cost of $27 million in a single quarter. It disposed of $100 million in inventory immediately. The total Russian exit cost $127 million in recorded losses. And here is what nobody covered. By divesting the 850 Russian stores, McDonald's mathematically improved its blended global operating margin. The Russian market had been running below the global corporate average. The geopolitical crisis that generated $127 million in losses simultaneously improved the permanent profitability of the company's remaining portfolio. McDonald's absorbed a $127 million punch, improved its margin structure, and used domestic US price increases, a 6% hike at the same time, to essentially pass the geopolitical cost onto American consumers. All of this happened within a single earnings quarter. Third, the loyalty data machine has no peer in the industry. 210 million active loyalty app users, generating $37 billion in system-wide sales. The app's ability to dynamically price items, charging different users different amounts for the same product based on their historical purchase behavior, is the most sophisticated consumer extraction tool in the QSR industry. McDonald's has turned its customer base into a behavioral data asset, and it is monetizing that asset in ways that are invisible to the consumer. 3 structural problems precisely stated. First, the debt architecture is now self-reinforcing in a dangerous direction. McDonald's borrows to buy back stock. Stock buybacks improve earnings per share. Improved EPS supports a higher stock price. A higher stock price allows executives to claim compensation tied to performance. Those same executives then approve more borrowing to fund more buybacks to sustain more EPS growth. This loop is stable only as long as the franchise revenue stream is perfectly predictable. The 2024 E. coli outbreak, the Middle East boycott, the value perception crisis, each of these demonstrated that the revenue stream is not perfectly predictable. It can be disrupted, and when it is disrupted, there is $54 billion in debt and $1.58 billion in annual interest that does not take a pause. Second, the franchise structure is a liability amplifier. The Sonneborn model was built for a world where a Kentucky franchisee's labor violation stayed in Kentucky. That world does not exist. A franchise decision in Israel can erase $6.87 billion in market capitalization in a single trading session. A contaminated onion supplier in Colorado can trigger a $100 million emergency recovery spend. The legal firewall between corporate and franchisee is intact. The reputational firewall is not. Third, the company is running a pricing strategy that is destroying its core identity. McDonald's is not supposed to be expensive. When it becomes expensive, it does not lose customers to Burger King. It loses customers to the grocery store. Those customers do not come back the same way. They recalibrate their relationship with the brand from affordable everyday habit to occasional treat. Fewer visits per month from the same number of customers is a structural decline disguised as loyalty. 3 realistic solutions. 1. Decouple the dividend from the debt cycle. McDonald's currently borrows money to pay its dividend while simultaneously spending $3.9 billion per year on expansion. The dividend has become a hostage. Cutting it would trigger institutional selling. Raising debt to sustain it is accelerating the leverage problem. A more disciplined approach would tie dividend growth to operating cash flow growth. 2. Build brand accountability directly into the franchise structure. The legal firewall is not going away, but the reputational firewall can be rebuilt through operational accountability mechanisms. Digital compliance reporting should be extended. 3. Solve the GLP-1 problem before it solves McDonald's. The proliferation of weight loss medications, Ozempic, Wegovy, represents a structural change in caloric consumption patterns that McDonald's has not fully priced in. The response cannot be a salad that nobody orders. It requires genuine menu engineering for the physiological reality of a customer base that will eat less, not just differently. Here is the framework. Every company in the world faces a version of the same question. Are you extracting value from your ecosystem or are you building it? McDonald's at its best was building something. McDonald's, at its most aggressive, the tax structure, the buyback loop, the child labor violations, is extracting. Sustainable companies extract value as a percentage of the value they create. McDonald's inherited one of the greatest brand assets in human history. The question for the next decade is whether it is building on that inheritance or consuming it. Companies that are extracting faster than they are building always look fine until they don't, and they never look fine when they stop. McDonald's built the world's most sophisticated machine for collecting rent and disguised it as a restaurant. The debt is not a crisis. The debt is the architecture. And as long as the franchise revenue keeps flowing, the architecture holds. But the architecture was built for a world where food was cheap, labor was compliant, consumers were predictable, and the brand was irreplaceable. That world is now ending. And McDonald's has $54 billion in reasons why it cannot afford to be wrong about what comes next. Next time, we turn to a company that built an entirely different kind of machine, one that doesn't sell you food. It sells you the right to use your own money, and it takes a percentage of everything, forever. The question we will answer: why does Visa charge merchants 3% when it costs them a fraction of a cent to process a transaction? And why have every government, every regulator, and every bank on earth tried to break that model and failed? That is Visa, and the answer will change how you think about money. If you want to understand the machinery behind the companies that run the world, subscribe. Not because it helps the channel, because the people who understand these systems make better decisions than the people who don't. That is not a pitch, it is just true. McDonald's doesn't sell you a burger. It sells you the illusion that the burger is the point.